January 14th, 1967. "Mom, where's Dad?" Richard Gaines asked his mother as she handed him his orange juice. "I need to get over to Sandy's house. He's still asleep and you mustn't wake him," Linda Gaines admonished her son. "He had to stay up late last night." This was almost true. Harold Gaines was, in actuality, sleeping off a major drunk. "But Sandy and me had plans," he said plaintively. "Sandy and I," Linda corrected. "I have some errands to run today. I can take you over to your friend's house. Your father can stay in bed. He's tired." Richard turned away. Tired was his mother's way of saying drunk. Richard's friend Sandy's house was not far from where Joe Hammond lived, but this fact did not cross the boy's mind. "Let me have about 15 minutes to fix my makeup, and I'll be ready to go." "Aw, Mom, you don't have to put on any makeup for that," Richard said, trying to be funny. Richard's mother gave him a quick smile, then turned and walked towards the washroom. "The hell I don't," she said in a whisper after the door was shut behind her. "So where is the intrepid field artillery off to today?" Catherine Bowman asked of her husband and son as she joined them at the breakfast table. Her son took a breath and immediately sang, "So it's hi, hi, he in the field artillery, count off your numbers loud and strong." "1, 2, Walter chimed in, "and where'er you go, you will always know that the caissons go rolling along," Henry finished. "No singing at the table," Catherine chided good-naturedly. "We're going to shoot the cannon Dad got me," Henry said proudly. "It's really big." "Not as big as some of the stuff your old man got to play with when he was in the Navy," Walter said. "What's the biggest gun you got to shoot, Dad?" "Got to touch off some shots out of a 5-inch rifle on a destroyer in '42, and I was on board the battleship Missouri when she fired all 9 of her 16-inch rifles later that same year. I didn't get to pull the trigger, of course, but that was just as well. The view was better from where I was watching." 9 16-inch guns, Henry said, awed at the thought. "What did that sound like?" "Like the absolute no fooling, this time it's for real, honest to God end of the world," Walter said with a big smile. "I've never seen anything like it before or since. That whole 50,000-ton ship moved sideways in the water about 8 feet when those 9 rifles fired." "How accurate were they?" "With the fire control system we had then, they could hit something the size of a small house at 20 miles, as I recall. Not bad for a gun platform sloshing around in a choppy sea." Henry quickly did some mental arithmetic. "A 40-foot group at 35,000 yards. That's almost 1 minute of angle accuracy. The best 30 caliber 1,000-yard target rifles aren't any better than that at a 50th of the distance." "Haven't you told me that your big caliber rifles shoot pretty well with almost any ammo, but the small bores need careful load development to get really good accuracy?" The boy chewed his lip. "I guess it really is easier to make a big gun shoot well if you've got good components," Henry said finally. "Shall we see how that rule applies to the newest addition to your arsenal?" Henry was already out of his chair and carrying his breakfast plate over to the sink. "Enough fooling around," Henry said under his breath. "It's time to touch it off." Henry Bowman took a deep breath as he lay in the grass and aimed through the telescopic sight mounted on the left side of the receiver. He started to squeeze the Solothurn's trigger with both his index and middle fingers, which was how the big gun had been designed to be fired. The Solothurn cannon, as a piece of military ordnance designed to stop tanks, was a colossal misallocation of resources and was obsolete almost from the day it was first produced. Designed and put into production in 1938 just as tank armor was undergoing a quantum leap upwards in its ability to resist penetration, the big Swiss gun had several major things going against it. 20 millimeter was the upper limit for a cartridge weapon which could still be carried by 2 or 3 men and operated by one. Yet a conventional cartridge of 20 millimeters was limited to a projectile of several ounces, and therefore had to rely on velocity and not explosive content to achieve its design goals. The high muzzle velocity and the inherent accuracy of a close-tolerance weapon with a rifled bore meant that the Solothurn could hit a tank at virtually any range where the shooter could still see the target. When the bullet struck a tank, however, virtually nothing happened. The 5-ounce projectile could penetrate no more than an inch of armor plate at 500 yards, and no tank made after 1940 was so lightly protected. In addition to being heavy, unwieldy, and ineffective on modern tank armor, the Solothurn S-18-1000 had a final flaw. It was made like a 100-pound Swiss chronometer. The precise fit and finish of its tool steel parts made it susceptible to jamming under conditions of neglect, and the man-hours and machining required to build a single example of the gun were sufficient to produce literally hundreds of cheap, lightweight, hand-carried rocket launchers capable of hitting a tank-sized object at a distance of 100 yards. The 4-pound rocket-propelled projectiles produced little recoil and carried shape-charged warheads capable of blasting a hole through armor that was over 1 foot thick. In a modern war against World War II ERA or later tanks, the Solothurn S-18-1000 was an utterly useless boat anchor. For Henry Bowman, it was a dream come true. "I hope this thing doesn't blow up," Henry said to himself as he prepared to fire the massive rifle. Ever since the first documented firearm had been fired in 1326, Henry's unbidden thought had been the instinctive wish of every gunner firing a large, unfamiliar weapon for the first time. When the pressure of Henry's fingers reached approximately 30 pounds, the Solothurn sear disengaged and the firing pin slammed into the primer. Henry Bowman had never fired a weapon that behaved anything like the way this one did. The 710 grain powder charge and the 2,160 grain bullet were both about 10 times as heavy as those in Henry's. Magnum Winchester Model 70 Max Collins had given him. As both bullet and burning powder blasted out the .52 barrel, a perforated muzzle brake, which was threaded onto the end of the barrel, redirected the high-velocity gases to the sides and back, reducing the 100-pound gun's recoil. The trade-off to this recoil reduction was increased concussion felt by the person firing the weapon. The sensation felt by the shooter, Henry would discover a few years later, could be closely duplicated by hanging a 2-diameter stick of 80% strength ditching dynamite by a thread from a tree limb and detonating it while standing 10 feet away. Henry's first thought as the gun lifted in recoil was how on earth could they have expected a soldier to fire this thing without any ear protection? His second thought was to wonder how close the bullet had come to his aiming point. As the 71 halves-foot-long gun moved Henry a few inches back under recoil, a white streak lanced out of the muzzle and disappeared into the side of an empty 55-gallon oil drum 140 yards distant. There was a barely visible flash, a puff of smoke, and a lot of dirt thrown into the air as the 1/3-pound bullet detonated on contact with the drum and the slug's hardened alloy core slammed into the hillside a few feet beyond. The Solothurn's recoil prevented Henry from seeing these things as they happened, but Walter was standing directly behind his son and saw the bullet's impact. A second later, Henry's eyes focused on the target site, and he could see he had made a center hit. The oil drum was misshapen slightly, and Henry could see that a large part of the back of it had been blasted away. "Sights seem to be about on," Walter commented in a voice that was utterly devoid of emotion. "This thing is great," Henry exclaimed. "Dad, you've got to try it. Wait, let me finish out the magazine." Henry settled back down behind the optical sight, and in half a minute the 10-round magazine was empty. On the 10th shot, the magazine itself was ejected from the gun. The Swiss designers had thoughtfully included this feature for rapid reloading in the heat of battle. Walter and Henry both looked at the distant target. It no longer resembled an oil drum. The metal was twisted and torn apart, and the hillside behind it showed the effects of the 10 high-velocity explosive projectiles. Henry was so excited he could hardly stand it. "We need some targets that are farther away," he said quickly. He scanned the area, trying to select a safe place to shoot the gun at a much longer distance, then remembered that his father hadn't yet had a chance to shoot. "Here, let me get another magazine." "You're going to love this one, Dad," Henry assured his father. Walter obligingly stretched out behind the bipod-mounted weapon, gave a final check to make sure his earplugs were seated properly, and prepared to try Henry's new gun. When the magazine was empty, Walter also had a big smile on his face. "What do you think, Dad?" his son asked. "I think I'll tell your buddy we're going to need more ammo." June 13th, 1967. Henry Bowman did not notice the strange look in his father's eyes as they slid the hangar door open. He also did not notice that it required just a little more effort than usual to pull the big Stearman out from the T-hangar onto the taxiway. He was too focused on going flying with his father to pay attention to such little details. Henry buckled himself in and turned around to face his father. "All set?" Walter asked his son. Let me keep the controls for a while. I've got something I want to do that's a little unusual. Don't get too worried when you see it coming. After that, you take over and I'll take some pictures. When we get low on fuel, bring it on back and land. Oh, one more thing. I bolted the lead back in the tail in case you wanted to do a B squared or two. The puzzled look on Henry's face that had appeared with Walter's first comment was replaced with a smile. He loved making the steerman tumble. Walter Bowman fired up the big radial engine and prepared to taxi. The recently finished Gateway Arch loomed ahead as the Bowmans flew over St. Louis at 3,000 feet. Walter had his 35mm Contarex strapped around his neck and chest with just enough slack so that he could lift the camera's viewfinder to his eye. The big Pratt & Whitney was howling along at full throttle as Walter raised the camera with his right hand and rolled the steerman inverted with his left. He pulled back on the stick and put the biplane into a screaming inverted dive. When the nose of the plane was aimed at the spot on the ground exactly between the legs of the stainless steel monument and the altimeter read 1,200 feet, Walter aimed the camera and snapped the shutter. The plane was about 700 feet from the ground. The Gateway Arch was 630 feet tall. Walter was using his widest angle lens, fastest film, and smallest lens aperture setting so as to get the greatest depth of field for the shot. The image centered in the Contarex's viewfinder was of the top of his instrument panel, the back of Henry's head in the front cockpit hole, and the upside-down legs of the stainless steel structure. As soon as he felt the shutter release, Walter tensed his abdominal muscles and pushed forward on the stick with all the strength in his left arm. The steerman flew dead center through the Gateway Arch and leveled at 200 feet above the ground, still inverted, as it passed over the bank of the Mississippi River, heading towards Illinois. Halfway across the river, Walter pushed harder on the stick and raised the nose. He let go of the camera, letting it dangle on its short leash. He took the stick in his right hand and eased back on the throttle with his left. At 2,000 feet, passing over the far bank and now flying above Illinois, Walter rolled the steerman upright and level. Only then did he feel the pain. It was like a hot poker in his right side. He closed his eyes and tried to will the agony away. When he opened them again, his son had turned around in the front cockpit and was staring at him with a huge grin on his face. Walter lifted both his hands in the air and nodded to Henry to show that he was turning over control of the airplane. For the next half hour, Walter took pictures as Henry went through a number of aerobatic maneuvers. The pain in his side worsened, but Walter was too pleased with Henry's proficiency to let his discomfort spoil the pleasure he was getting. When Henry executed a perfect B squared, Walter managed to snap 2 frames in the middle of the tumbling maneuver before the steerman fell into an inverted spin. Walter got off another shot before Henry reversed the controls and put the plane in a stable inverted dive before rolling it upright. As the airport came into view in the distance and Henry cut the throttle to begin his descent into the traffic pattern, Walter Bowman did something he hadn't done for many years. He unbuckled his harness and levered himself out onto the lower wing. Henry was startled to see Walter appear at the right side of the front cockpit hole, but he leaned over to the right and angled his head, knowing his father would want to yell something in his ear. That was something I've always wanted to do. I think we did it fast enough that no one could have gotten proof. Henry nodded in reply. What Walter had done a half hour before had been highly illegal. Think you can land it with me standing here on the wing? Henry snapped his head to the right and stared in disbelief at his father. He knew he had heard him correctly. Walter was laughing in the windblast and motioned his son to turn his ear towards him again. Go ahead, Walter yelled, just like all the times before. You got a perfect headwind, and I'm clipped to one of the flying wires. If it doesn't feel right, goose the throttle and make a go-round, and I'll get back in. Just remember that with the lead bolted in the tail, your CG is aft of the limit, even with me up here by you, so watch your aft stick. And don't do any inverted maneuvers on final, he joked. All of a sudden, Henry smiled and nodded. Mom would have a heart attack if she saw this, he thought with an inward chuckle. If I don't crash, Dad will be fine. He watched his airspeed and entered the downwind leg of the traffic pattern on a 45-degree angle at an altimeter reading of 1,400 feet. The airport was 405 feet above sea level. Henry scanned the pattern for other aircraft. There were none. He maintained his descent as he turned onto the downwind leg. With his father standing on the right wing, he found that he had to put in a little more left rudder to hold the steerman in the proper attitude. Henry turned onto final 300 feet above the ground at an airspeed of 60 knots. He cut the throttle back to idle when he saw he could make the runway with no power. He was intent on the landing and did not see this father snapping pictures of him one-handed while holding onto the wing strut with the other. He also did not notice that there was no clip holding his father to any of the flying wires. At what he judged to be about 3 feet over the runway, Henry increased back pressure on the stick to halt his descent. He was jockeying with the rudder pedals to keep the nose aimed straight down the center line of the asphalt. The big biplane held its 3-foot altitude as Henry increased back pressure on the stick. The boy was glancing every couple of seconds at the airspeed indicator, watching it wind down. As the needle swung through and indicated 48 knots, the stick was all the way back in Henry's lap and the steerman settled gently onto the runway, no longer having sufficient speed to keep flying. The main gear and the tailwheel touched the asphalt at almost the same instant. With the 10-knot headwind, the steerman was only traveling about 40 miles per hour on the ground, but Henry knew that he was now at the most critical point of the landing. With a tricycle gear airplane, which had become the most common type starting in the 50s, the steerable third wheel was in the nose, ahead of the airplane's center of gravity. In this inherently stable system, the plane would attempt to return to a straight path if the nose gear were turned to one side and then released. A conventional gear airplane, like the steerman, had its third wheel in the rear, behind the center of gravity. This was better for landing on poor terrain, where 2 large main gear in front could endure forces that would snap off a single, more fragile nose gear. The drawback was that having the third steerable wheel in the rear created an inherently unstable system. If a tailwheel airplane got angled more than a small amount to one side, the plane would continue swinging around so that its center of gravity ended up in front of the main landing gear. This was called a ground loop. If it happened at any speed greater than a slow walk, the airplane would tip over and put a wingtip into the ground, causing substantial damage. Taildragger pilots had to quickly, judiciously, and continually use the rudder and brake pedals to keep the plane aimed straight until its ground speed was down to a crawl. Henry knew if he allowed the nose to swing more than slightly out of line, he could not prevent a ground loop, for the finest pilot in the world could not repeal the laws of physics. The problem was magnified by the tall landing gear that was installed on the custom steerman, necessary to provide ground clearance for the oversized prop. Walter, however, had taught his son well, and as the biplane settled onto the runway, Henry held the stick all the way back to plant the tailwheel firmly on the asphalt, and he kept the nose pointed straight with quick, precise jabs on the rudder pedals. The steerman coasted down to walking speed, and Henry pushed gently on the right brake and turned off the runway at midfield. Only then did he glance over at his father, who was smiling broadly. Henry tapped the left brake and blipped the throttle, and the steerman turned onto the taxiway and headed for the hangar at the rate of a man's brisk trot. "Let's put her to bed and go get something to eat. You hungry?" Walter asked after Henry had pulled the mixture control to full lean and the engine had quit. "Real hungry, Dad." "Steak and shake suit you?" he asked, naming their favorite drive-in. "Perfect." His father jumped off the wing and walked back to the steerman's tail to swing it around before pushing the plane back into the hangar. The pain in Walter's side had eased to a dull ache. "Your maneuvers were better than ever today, son. You really greased in that landing, too." Walter took another bite of his steak burger. His appetite wasn't what it normally was. Henry smiled at the compliment, then asked his father something that had puzzled him all morning. "Dad, when you flew through the arch, weren't you afraid of losing your license? No one else has a plane that looks like this one. What if someone reports us?" Walter smiled, but his face was filled with sadness. "It doesn't matter, Henry. My medical is up this month, and I wouldn't pass if I tried to renew it. That was my last flight in the steerman, son. It's one of the reasons I wanted to go flying with you today. I needed to talk to you about it." Henry put down the French fries he had been about to put in his mouth and stared at his father. "What do you mean you can't pass the physical? What's wrong, Dad?" Walter took a very deep breath before answering. "I've got cancer, renal cancer. That's when it's in your kidneys, and it's one of the really bad ones." Henry was horrified. His father was in better shape than the parents of almost all of his classmates at school. He could not believe what he was hearing. Cancer. But can't they do anything about it? The boy TRD frantically to persuade himself that his father was going to be all right, but he knew he would not. Henry had watched his grandfather, Charles Collins, waste away to nothing from throat cancer 5 years before. "They're doing it right now. That's why I'm out flying today. But I've been losing some weight, as I'm sure you can see, and the pain in my sides comes more often. It's one of those things, Henry, just like Grandpa." He smiled with genuine warmth. "I'll be around for a while. You haven't seen the last of your old dad yet. I'm through with flying, but no aviator ever had a better send-off than the one I just had with you." Henry stared at his lap. He had entirely lost his appetite. Walter continued matter-of-factly, "I thought for a long time about what to do with the Stearman. I always wanted it to be yours one day, but you're only 14 and wouldn't be able to fly it on your own for another year and a half. Also, it's got some serious expenses coming up. An airshow pilot has made me a very good offer on it. He's got a clip-wing Cub with a 140 Lycoming in it, an inverted system, aileron spades, and big tires for landing almost anywhere. It's registered experimental. He's going to trade it to me, along with quite a bit of cash. You'll have your own aero ship you can solo on your 16th birthday, and the gas costs won't break you. I'm going to put the money in an account that will be yours when you turn 21. Should be worth quite a bit by then." Walter didn't mention the life insurance policy, or that Henry would also start getting his Social Security. "I think that's a better plan for the long run." Henry nodded without looking up. He wasn't thinking about flying. He was imagining what his life would be like without his father. "When did you find out, Dad?" he asked finally. "Last week they finished up the last of their tests at Barnes. There's no doubt now. Your mother suspected ever since I first started feeling bad. She's the reason they caught it this early and were able to give me some medicine that helps with the pain." Henry turned to look out the window so his father wouldn't see him crying. Henry Bowman was absolutely miserable as he got out of the car and went to open the garage door for his father. He watched as Walter pulled the car into its space and opened the door to get out. Henry stared at his father as he climbed out of the car. He was searching for a visible sign of Walter's affliction. His father, however, looked the same as he always had. It was hard to believe that this strong, vital man harbored a fatal disease that was relentlessly killing him. Walter stepped over to the side of the garage where a tarpaulin hung down, covering something. "If we can't fly together, then you and I are going to have to do more shooting." Henry could not believe his eyes as his father pulled away the tarpaulin. There were 20 wooden crates stacked against the wall, all with German lettering stenciled on their sides. He'd have to get out his manual to decipher the words exactly, but Henry needed no dictionary to translate 20 millimeters, and the crates themselves were familiar. 2 empty ones had been sitting in a corner of the basement for more than a month. Walter's smile broadened as he watched Henry's reaction. "There's some other calibers coming," he explained, "but I thought I'd better jump on the ammo for your Solotherm first. Your buddy made me a deal I couldn't pass up." Henry Bowman started crying again, but this time he did not turn away. April 5th, 1968. "My dad says he's surprised it didn't happen sooner." Some of the students gathered outside the lunchroom nodded gravely at this assessment. The Sturks boy did not add that his father had also said, "And I hope they give the guy who did it a medal." John Burroughs' school believed in promoting academic excellence and opening pupils' minds, but some parents differed with the institution's philosophy of racial harmony. Mr. Sturks wasn't the only father who, in the security of his own living room, was not afraid to assert that the death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was no great loss to the civilized world. "I still can't believe somebody shot him." This was another student who, like the vast majority of his classmates at John Burroughs, came from a white upper-class St. Louis family. Like a somewhat smaller number of Burroughs students, if the 10th grader had been asked 24 hours earlier who Dr. King was, he would have been unable to answer. "I'd like to kill the guy who did it," the sophomore added with great conviction. "To spare Mrs. King from having to return to Memphis?" Henry Bowman asked deadpan. The others looked at him oddly, but no one said anything in reply. "Everybody at the paper's expecting real trouble," a short brown-haired girl broke in. Her father worked on the editorial page of the St. Louis Globe-Democrat, one of 2 dailies that served the metropolitan area. "Dad's afraid we'll have riots." The girl's father was not the only person in St. Louis to hold that opinion. "Jesus Christ, do you think you've got enough ammo?" The mayor of Wellston asked his chief of police as he watched the man bring 2 more cans and put them on the pile. There were now over 40 of the metal boxes stacked up against the air vent. It was the first time the mayor had been on the roof of City Hall, and he marveled at the number of cigarette butts he saw on dytar paper. He turned his attention back to the current project. "And do you really think this is a good idea?" The mayor was not at all sure that placing a live, tripod-mounted, heavy-barreled Browning caliber belt-fed machine gun on the edge of the roof of the Wellston City Hall was the most appropriate response to local concerns about possible rioting. "We likely won't see any trouble in this area at all," he added. His tone showed more hope than conviction. Wellston was one of the poorer areas of St. Louis, and in poor neighborhoods, crime is often a major issue. Both the mayor and the police chief knew that any breakdown in security would be recognized as a perfect opportunity by potential looters. "You're damn right we won't see any trouble," the chief said with mild indignation. His face glistened with sweat from the effort of lugging an 80-pound gun, 40-pound tripod, and several thousand rounds of linked ammunition up from the storeroom. His smile was bright. "Put old Ma Deuce up here where every damned one with a mind to bust windows and loot can get a good long look, with me or Jack sitting behind her. Won't be any riot here. Old Uncle drilled it into my head real well in Korea. You take care of Ma Deuce, and she'll take care of you." He looked intently at the mayor. "You recall any riots in Wellston when they had that mess in Watts back in '65? The mayor shook his head. They had erected the big Browning on the roof 3 years earlier, during the riots in California. They had also called a meeting with local ministers and other community leaders so that the members of their congregations could be encouraged to take similar measures to protect their homes and businesses. Delinquents in Wellston got the clear message that looting would not be tolerated and that "you loot, we shoot" was official city policy. The M2 heavy barrel, BMG, on the roof of City Hall had been a constant reminder of that during the Watts riots. Wellston had avoided the violence and theft that plagued other areas. As it turned out, the strategy was once again exactly right. Would-be rioters in Wellston rapidly concluded that other neighborhoods offered more opportunity, and Wellston remained peaceful. April 6, 1968. "Got a safari planned any time soon, Mr. Baxter?" Al Goodman asked in his nasal monotone. Most gun shop conversations across the country that day centered around the King assassination, but at Goodman's the talk, as always, revolved around fine guns and big game hunting. "No, got another baby on the way, maybe in a couple of years, and when I go again it won't be to Portuguese Angola. Those bohunks are the worst excuse for professional hunters I've ever seen in my life." The man shook his head in disgust at the memory. "They can't imagine doing any stalking on foot. They want you to do all your shooting out of the Jeep. And they don't have a clue where to look for the game. I ended up being the guide most of the time." Max Collins, who was several yards away looking at a Perazzi trap gun, listened in. He had been considering a safari himself, and the booking agent had been pushing him to sign up for 3 weeks in Angola. The man who was speaking was about 30. Max had seen him in Goodman's before and knew him vaguely. He listened as the younger man continued. "I think Rhodesia next time," Baxter went on. "That, or back to Kenya, but I'd like to go someplace new." "The booking agent I've been talking to has been pushing Angola," Max said, joining the conversation. "They always recommend whatever they've sent people on before. That's fine if they've got some basis for comparison, but a lot of these guys have never even been to Africa themselves, and push whoever will give them the fattest percentage. I'm in insurance, so believe me, I know how that works." "Sounds like you've got some experience there. You'd advise against Angola?" "Don't get me wrong, there's all kinds of game in Angola right now. It's just that the Portuguese guides are atrocious, if mine was typical, and I think he was. Give you an example, the pro I had, the trigger on his rifle was screwed up and he never had it fixed. Striker wouldn't stay cocked unless he put the safety on while he was closing the bolt. Then the gun would fire when he took the safety off." "So he didn't back you up?" "That was the problem. No backup would have been fine with me. This idiot used his gun the way it was." "What do you mean?" "He'd close the bolt while engaging the safety, then fire it by flicking the safety off instead of pulling the trigger?" "Exactly." Baxter paused for effect, then added, "And he said his gun had been that way for over a year." Max shook his head in amazement. Then Baxter remembered something. "Now, I did meet a white hunter while I was over there who was born here in the States. Don't know much else about him, only talked to him at the airport. Seemed to know his stuff, though. If you're serious about going to Angola, I think you should try to find out more about him." "Who is he?" "Guy from, where was it? Colorado, I think he said. Young for a pro, about my age. His name is Raymond Johnson. April 2007, 1968. Walter Bowman was down to 105 pounds. He had survived 10 months longer than the 12 weeks that the cancer specialist had privately given him to live, but it was evident that now all of his reserves had been exhausted. He had been unable to speak for several days. Henry waved the private nurse out of the way, sat down next to the bed, and took his father's hand. He stared down at the husk of what had so recently been a very strong man. Henry looked at his father for a long time. Walter's eyes were still clear. After a time, the stricken man shook his head almost imperceptibly. Henry saw the gesture immediately. He swallowed. "It's time, isn't it?" Walter Bowman's head moved a fraction of an inch in a nod. Henry nodded in reply. "Keep the front cockpit open for me, Dad. We'll go flying the next time I see you." Henry felt his hand clasped in a powerful grip that shocked him with its intensity, and he instinctively returned it. As quickly as they had become taut, his father's muscles went slack. Walter Bowman was dead. June 5th, 1968. "Oh my God!" Catherine Bowman exclaimed. "What is it, Mom?" Henry asked, racing into the family room where his mother sat in front of the television set. "Bobby Kennedy's been shot just after midnight at a reception at some hotel in California." Her son sat down on the couch without taking his eyes off the television screen. The newsman was explaining what he had been told so far. The shooting had happened at the celebration following Kennedy's victory in the California primary for the 1968 presidential election. A young man, apparently from a Middle Eastern country, had shot the senator with a pistol. The number of shots was not known. The gunman had been wrestled to the floor and disarmed. Robert Kennedy had been rushed to the hospital. His condition at the moment was not known either. It would later come out that pro football star Roosevelt Grier had been one of those who had thrown Sirhan B. Sirhan to the floor and ripped the gun out of his hand, and that Grier had broken the shooter's finger in the process of doing this. People across the entire country had an eerie feeling of déjà vu as they sat riveted to their television sets, watching the news. Catherine Bowman was no exception. Henry Bowman's mother was overpowered by two very different sets of feelings. First of all, she was no fan of the Kennedy family. When she was growing up, she had watched the man who had made his fortune through stock manipulation and bootlegging liquor be appointed head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and later ambassador to England. She had then seen the ambassador's admiration for the Nazi regime that had nearly killed her brother, and she had always despised the man and his obvious assumption that his sons were the rightful heirs to Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and the good Roosevelt. Those feelings, however, did not change the horror Catherine Bowman felt at the thought of a woman having two of her sons slain by murderers. No one should have to experience the loss of a child, and Catherine Bowman's heart went out to Rose Kennedy for what she had endured. Henry's mother realized with a start that she had felt exactly this way once before. More than 20 years earlier, she'd heard the news that 2 atomic bombs had been dropped on Japan. Over 100,000 Japanese citizens had been killed. Japan had surrendered, and American servicemen, including her brother Max, were coming home instead of being sent to invade the Japanese mainland. Her thoughts then were the same as those she had now. How horrible, and thank God. "It's just like his brother," she breathed in disbelief. "He's dead." "Maybe not, Mom. We don't know how bad it is yet," Henry said, not very convincingly. Catherine Bowman was absolutely right in her first comment. A second Kennedy son had just been shot, allegedly by another young, disillusioned misfit with ties to a third world country. All witnesses would state that the assailant had approached the senator from the front, yet the 3 bullets had entered Kennedy's body from the rear. The number of bullet wounds inflicted upon Kennedy and 5 other people, combined with the number of bullet holes in the walls and ceiling of the surrounding room, was absolutely astonishing considering that the supposedly lone assassin had used one caliber revolver and nothing else. Guess who told police investigators they had seen other men with guns would have their testimony ignored. All this would be a bit much for many people to be expected to accept for the second time, and questions about both assassinations would persist for decades. Catherine Bowman was wrong in her latter statement, however. Robert Kennedy was in fact still alive. He had been shot once in the head and twice behind the armpit with a caliber revolver. Due to the low power of the cartridge and the perverse fact that the human brain can often sustain damage to certain areas with minimal apparent effect, a startling number of people have survived head wounds from slugs and recovered fully. Robert Kennedy was not one of those cases, however, and he was pronounced dead that afternoon at 1:44 p.m. California time, July 10th, 1968. Like how it runs? Max Collins asked his nephew. He and Henry were west of Wentzville, about 70 miles out of St. Louis, heading for the live pigeon shoot in Reno, Nevada. Traffic on Interstate 70 that far west of the city was almost non-existent, and the needle on the Impala's big speedometer held steady on 105. It's a lot quieter than I would have thought. Not nearly as noisy as your Riviera was. Not working as hard, got a lot more motor than the Buick. Ron Winterhoff said I should let him do the heads, balance the crank, open up the exhaust, and drop the nose an inch and a half. Damn if that kid didn't know exactly what he was talking about. This 427 Chevy is twice the car that Buick ever dreamed of being. To make his point, Max pushed his right foot down until the accelerator lay against the carpet. The big V8's exhaust note dropped half an octave, and then both it and needle on the speedometer started to climb. The pointer was closing in on the far right side of the gauge as the full-size Chevy's speed continued to increase. Max relaxed his right foot, and the noise stabilized along with the car's rate of travel. Wind noise and the sound of the engine precluded normal conversation, but the ride was remarkably vibration-free. It felt to Henry as if the car could travel all day at this rate, the highway patrol notwithstanding. Max held the car at this speed for almost 10 minutes, during which time he and his nephew covered over 22 miles and passed 19 other vehicles. Henry stretched his legs out in front of him and took a deep breath. He and his uncle were both having a very good time. Max Collins eased off on the throttle when a cluster of 5 or 6 cars appeared in the distance. By the time he and Henry caught up to them, he had slowed the Impala so that it matched their velocity of 70 miles per hour. I wish the people around here would learn to stay in the right lane if they're not passing anyone. Seems like the folks in this part of Missouri have never heard of proper lane discipline. Henry waited for his uncle to start swearing under his breath at the drivers of the cars in the left lane. Max hated inept drivers. Max, however, stayed to the right and dropped back several lengths. He showed no evidence of irritation, and Henry smiled in understanding. He's having too good a time heading off to Reno for a big-money pigeon shoot. Even left-lane bandits can't spoil his day. Ever since his airborne experience in the 1944 Normandy invasion, Max Collins had preferred traveling by car for any trip of less than 2,000 miles. This was especially true if he himself were able to do the driving and he was in his own car. Max Collins had great appreciation for competent high-speed road cars that could carry him and all his gear safely, reliably, and comfortably. The ported, balanced, and lowered 1967 Impala Supersport that he and Henry were piloting across the country was the best vehicle he had ever owned for that task. Max Collins was not the only person in the car who was in a good mood. 15-year-old Henry Bowman hadn't smiled so much since his father had been alive and healthy. Max had invited the boy to join him on the 10-day trip to Reno, and Henry had begged his mother to be allowed to go. Catherine had readily agreed. July 4th was normally Henry's favorite holiday. Without Walter, it had been very sad for both the boy and his mother, but for Henry especially. Max's idea to invite Henry to go to Reno had been an inspired one. There was a big gun show in Reno at the same time as the highest purse live pigeon shoot in the entire country. Max had given Henry a Winchester Model 70N H&H Magnum 2 years before, and the rifle was now in a case in the Impala's trunk along with Max's pigeon guns. Goodman's had taken it in on trade from an elk hunter who thought it kicked too much, and since it had a few scratches in the buttstock, Al Goodman hadn't given much for it. Henry was delighted with the weapon, and had wasted no time ordering 1,000 fired cartridge cases from the Winchester factory and variety of bullets and powders to work up loads. The big, dangerous game rifle grouped almost as well as his target rifle when using ammunition loaded with inexpensive 235 grain spear bullets and a case full of Hodgdon's surplus 4,831 powder. He'd been shooting the gun several times a week since school ended. "Do you really think there'll be any place I can shoot a rifle at the shotgun range?" Henry asked his uncle. "Hell yes, kid. It's out in the middle of a goddamn desert. Nothing but sand and cactus and maybe a few lizards crawling around. There wouldn't be any people at all in the state if the blue nosies in California had ever had sense enough to allow gambling. Max saw an opening in traffic and accelerated past the other cars, once again letting the big coupe stretch its legs. It's a damn shame I can't get you interested in shotguns. There's a hell of a lot more money in one major trap or pigeon shoot than in a whole year's worth of all the rifle and pistol matches put together. Henry smiled but said nothing. Shotguns are okay, but they're kind of boring, he thought. Max glanced over at him, almost able to read his mind. Hell, I shouldn't say that, Max relented. Truth is, I like rifles and pistols better myself. A damn shame you can't make any money with them, though. His face took on a look of irritation as he thought of something else. We'll be shooting double B guns before it's all over if the sons of bitches in Washington have their way. That fucking Arab. With a goddamn starter's pistol. Max left the sentence unfinished. The weapon Sirhan had actually used was an H&R, and Max knew it, but his disgust was quite plain. The idea of an American figure and his Secret Service protectors being bested by a Middle Eastern street punk with a weapon of only slightly better quality than the blank guns used at track meets was something Max Collins found much more offensive than the basic concept of killing a public servant. Henry scowled at his uncle's last comments. After the King and Kennedy assassinations, which had come less than 3 months apart, there had been a frenzy of activity as politicians loudly proclaimed the need for new restrictions on firearm purchase and ownership. Whatever's coming, he thought, it's not going to be good. I guess this one's got a vacancy, Max said unnecessarily as he pulled into the motel's parking lot. It was a little after 1 a.m, local time. They were a mile off the highway, in the middle of Colorado. I'll get the guns out of the trunk while you're getting a room, Henry offered. His uncle handed him the keyring before easing his tall frame out of the Impala. The engine was making soft ticking noises in the cool night air as Henry went to open the trunk. Henry Bowman had their gun cases, range kits, and both traveling bags lined up on the concrete walk by the time his uncle returned from the office, where a sleepy clerk had taken his cash and handed him the key to a double room. Max picked up 3 of the pieces of luggage and led the way to their accommodations. Driving enervated Max, particularly when it was at high speeds. Now that the car was parked and a mattress beckoned, he realized how tired he was. After using the toilet and making sure his travel alarm was wound, he got out of his clothes and stretched out on the bed nearest the door. It was a little too short, but that was nothing unusual for him. He closed his eyes, knowing sleep was about to overtake him. 7 o'clock too early for you, kid? Shower and grab some breakfast before we get rolling again? Henry grinned. He had dozed off and on in the car during the last few hours of the day's drive. It's fine with me. I'm going to go get a soda from the machine out front. He felt in his pocket for a dime as he left the room. Soda machines at gas stations and motels often had flavors that his mother refused to buy at home, and the one by the registration office did not disappoint him. The night was quiet, and the glow of neon was the brightest light nearby. Henry looked up at the sky as he sipped from the bottle, and he realized he could see several times as many stars as he could in Missouri. This phenomenon was the converse of the one Ray Johnson had observed 14 years before, when he had moved from Pitkin County to Boston. As Henry Bowman stared up at the heavens that night, he had no inkling of the effect that his talent and passion would have on the lives of others. One of the people whose life would be most affected was a man who currently lived on the other side of the world, but who had grown up near the spot where a 15-year-old boy from Missouri was now standing, happily drinking a grape soda at 1 a.m. July 13th, 1968. Adams, the auctioneer announced. Do I hear 500? Silence. 300. Still no response. $100 minimum bid. Mr. Adams, do you want to buy yourself for one hue? 100? Yelled a bidder. Got 100, looking for 150, 150, the auctioneer declared as a hand went up. Jerry Adams eventually went for $225. Collins, said the announcer when he reached the 5th name on the list. He looked up from his clipboard and recognized Max. Do I hear 500? There was a brief pause. Max was squinting, looking at the increased movement of the clouds in the sky. It looked like it might get very windy. 500, Max said in a firm voice. Then everybody can get on to the real shooters. He favored the group with a self-deprecating grin. Collins bids 500 on himself. Any others? As Max had suspected, there were no higher bids. If no one had agreed to meet the auctioneer's first suggestion and the bidding had dropped, it might well have ended up higher. Max was well known as an excellent live bird shooter, but by his own admission he was not a full-time pro on the trap and pigeon circuit. 500 was a high starting bid for any amateur, and Max had gently reminded the bidders of who was coming up for auction in a few minutes. "Sold," the auctioneer announced, and scribbled the number on his sheet. Henry Bowman was disappointed that no one else had wanted to bid on his uncle. Max Collins smiled to himself. "Devers!" the auctioneer almost shouted. 2,000! yelled a voice in the crowd before the auctioneer had time to suggest an opening bid. 3! This came from several men speaking at once. 35! came another voice, and the auctioneer's eyes switched to the newest speaker. The auctioneer was present because the Reno shoot was being run as a Calcutta. It was this fact that had drawn both the best live bird shooters in the nation and the huge number of spectators and professional gamblers to the Nevada event. In a Calcutta, shooters paid an entry fee which went to the sponsors of the competition. In this case, it was $100 per shooter. Before the shoot started, an auction was held, and each competitor was auctioned off to the highest bidder. If any shooter failed to fetch the $100 minimum bid, he could either drop out and get his entry fee refunded, forfeit his chance at the prize but still shoot in competition, or purchase himself for $100. No shooter ever chose the first option, and only rarely did one opt for the second. It was a matter of pride. The revenue raised by the auction became the winning purse. The shooter who won the competition got a percentage of the purse, and whoever had purchased him at auction got the rest of it. In the Reno shoot, the split was 15% to the shooter and 85% to the bidder who had bought him. If a shooter who had bought himself happened to win, he kept all the winnings. It was rare, but it happened once in a while. First place paid half the purse. Second took 30%, and third paid 20%. From the standpoint of prize money, fourth place was no better than dead last. For this reason, there were myriad side bets going on entirely apart from the sponsors of the shoot. Some of these bets were larger than any of the amounts the shooters were bringing at auction. 6,000. Do I hear 6,000 for Devers? Said the auctioneer. 5,500 once, twice. Sold to Mr. Burke for 5,500. Modest applause went up from the crowd. Joe Devers was the odds-on favorite to win. With the purse expected to top $40,000, Burke was looking at close to a 3-to-1 return if his man ended up with a high score. Other entrants in the Reno shoot came up for bid and were duly auctioned off. Heavy bidding centered on 8 shooters. There was moderate activity on about a dozen serious amateurs, who were generally thought to be about the same ability as Henry's uncle. Most of the remaining competitors were bought for $100 to $150, either by themselves or by personal friends hoping that a miracle would happen. That's the last of it. We start at 10 o'clock sharp, gentlemen. See you then. The meeting broke up. July 16th, 1968. Pull. At the command from Norm Frakes, who was the first shooter up on the third day of the shoot, the trap boy hit the button on the control in his hand, and the trap just to the right of the center one snapped open. A jet of compressed air forced the disoriented bird a few yards into the air, and the pigeon immediately got its bearings and started flying with the wind. Frakes swung his woodward action Purdy to his left and fired once. His shot pattern was perfectly centered on the bird, and it crumpled in flight, dead. Its body arced through the air, rolling from the impact of the shot charge. The dead bird hit on its back in the dirt, landing less than 2 feet from the fence and bouncing into the wire. Murmurs went up from the crowd. The Calcutta was a 75-bird event, with each participant shooting 25 birds each day. The first 2 days had been calm, and 7 competitors were on the board with scores of either 48 or 49. Max Collins, Joe Devers, and young Britt Robinson were the 3 leading scorers, with 4 others just 1 bird behind. Norm Frakes stood at 43. "Norm's a good shot," Max whispered to his nephew, "but he takes too much time being careful. Don't be surprised if he loses 6 or 8 birds he kills in this wind. If that one had come out any of the traps on the left side, it would have been a lost bird." Henry nodded in understanding. He had realized this last fact the instant he had seen the dead pigeon hit the ground. As Henry considered Norman Frakes' lack of speed, a boy ran out into the ring carrying a pigeon and stowed it in the empty trap from which the first bird had been released. Live pigeon competitions had originated in Mexico. There, human bird throwers use sleight of hand, feinting movements, and tremendous arm muscles to inject uncertainty into where the bird would go. In the U.S., the element of chance was provided by machines. Norm Frakes stood at the shooter station facing an oval-shaped dirt area which stretched from left to right in front of him. The oval was bounded by a wire fence 28 inches tall. Positioned in an arc 14 yards in front of the shooter were 9 metal devices, each one about 6 feet from its neighbor. These were the traps, and each one of them held a pigeon. Henry thought they looked like large iron bananas. There were lead smears on some of them, and Henry wondered how often the human bird throwers down south ended up with pellet wounds. The shooter held his shotgun aimed at the center trap and called pull when he was ready to have a bird released. When the trap operator pressed the button on his control box, the sides of one of the traps opened, releasing the bird. No one, including the operator, had any idea which one of the 9 traps it would be. That was randomly determined by the electrics of the system. As the iron banana snapped open, a jet of compressed air from a fitting inside the device launched the bird out of the trap. This served 2 purposes. It got the bird moving much more quickly than if it were merely released, and it also disoriented the pigeon so that the bird's initial flight path was completely unpredictable. Sometimes the pigeon continued climbing, and sometimes it flew straight down to within a few feet of the ground before streaking left, right, away, or straight at the man with the shotgun. The shooter had to recognize which trap was releasing the pigeon, understand the bird's movement, swing on the bird, fire, kill it, and have it fall within the fenced area to have it count for score. Live pigeon shooting was the most challenging and unpredictable of all shotgun competitions, and the level of excitement was greater than Henry had ever seen before. Pull! This time the bird came out of the 3rd trap from the left and started flying with the wind immediately. Frakes centered his shot, but it was too late. The dead bird landed a good 10 feet outside the fence. The shooter swore under his breath. He and all the spectators realized this gusty weather was going to make for very difficult shooting indeed. In Mexico, like I told you, Max explained to Henry, they don't have these 9 metal traps. They've got one bird boy on a strip of concrete, kind of like a sidewalk. He can move however much he wants to as long as he stays on the sidewalk. He'll dance around, fake throwing the bird one way, and really just toss a feather out while whipping the bird in some other direction behind his back. The really good ones, they'll make some shooters a side bet that they won't score even 1 bird out of 10. Where does the shooter hold before the thrower releases the bird? Henry asked. Right on the thrower's head. Henry took a moment to think about that. Don't they ever get shot? Yes, they do, especially when you get a shooter using a release trigger, which most people use when money's involved because they're just a little bit faster. I've shot live pigeon matches down south, but I won't use a release trigger. Saw a boy get killed that way once. He stopped on the concrete strip to grin at the shooter, a guy from Georgia who'd never used a release trigger before. The grin was part of the kid's routine to distract the guy before throwing the bird, I guess. Man relaxed his grip and took out the left half of the kid's neck. He bled out in about 10 seconds. Did they stop the match? Hell no. Got his brother to replace him. Brother had an even better arm, in my opinion. Watching those throwers is really something, but I've never gotten used to aiming right on their heads, even using a standard trigger. I shoot a lot better when it's just those iron bananas holding the birds. He smiled and wiggled his eyebrows as he used Henry's descriptive term for the pigeon traps. I gotta go get my gear, kid. I'm up pretty soon. The big man turned to walk towards the Impala, and Henry went back to watching the current shooter. By the time Max's name was called, the desert wind had increased and was gusting to 30 knots. High score so far that day was 21 out of a possible 25, shot by Britt Robinson. The 4th and 5th seeded shooters were in 2nd and 3rd place. Joe Devers had not yet come to the line. In an attempt to compensate for conditions, some of the shooters had taken to holding on the far left trap. With the wind blowing hard from the right, it was the left side traps that were yielding most of the missed birds. Max held on the center trap as he took a deep breath. He didn't want to alter the presentation of the birds from what he was used to, wind or no wind. Pull! The far left trap sprang open just as a powerful gust of wind blew several hats off some of the spectators. The bird's path started curving downwind even while it was still traveling upward from the compressed air. It had not even reached the apex of its launch when the bottom barrel of Max's Fabry cracked and a cloud of feathers erupted from around the pigeon. They were carried away on the wind while the shapeless dead mass spun through the air and slammed into the base of the wire fence. Dead bird, thought Henry, as he felt the hair on his arm stand up. The crowd murmured its appreciation, and several of the spectators who had not been paying much attention stopped what they were doing and waited to see what happened on Max's second bird. No shooter yet had gotten off a shot on the far left trap in so heavy a wind and still killed the bird inside the fence. Max turned towards the center trap as the bird boy refilled the empty one on the end. His senses seemed even more keen than usual, and the good feeling he'd had when he stepped up to the line only intensified. He broke the gun open, ejected the spent case, switched the unfired shell from the top barrel into the lower one, and slid a new shell from his ammo pouch into the top barrel. Max raised the shotgun to his shoulder and put the front gold bead on the base of the center trap. Pull! What happened next caused a flurry of activity among the people who had been making heavy side bets as the competition continued. Max pulled the trigger the instant his brain realized that it was the middle trap that was opening. Collins' reflexes were at their absolute peak, and the center of the shot charge hit the pigeon when the bird was less than 2 feet off the ground. Several of the spectators thought the trap had been empty, for they had not even seen the bird. Jesus Christ, Charlie Potts said to Ed Mears, who was standing next to him. Did you see that? Mears nodded without speaking. Shooting a standard trigger, too, another man added. Who is this man? Whispered a third. He was from Barcelona. Max Collins, out of Missouri. Good guy if you don't get him mad at you. See him at some of the big trap shoots, but he likes live pigeons the best. Saw him shoot in Mexico once, but he wasn't this fast.
I don't believe I have ever even seen him before, said the Spaniard.
You say he likes live birds best? Why is he not shooting a release trigger? Any serious live bird shoot? Pull! This time the pigeon came out of the trap, second from the far left. Max crumpled the bird about 6 feet off the ground, and it fell in the dirt well short of the fence. Damn! What'd this guy bring in the auction, and who's got him? Bought himself for $500. Opening bid. No one raised it. Damn, that's strong. He likes to bet, especially on himself. And the reason he doesn't use a release trigger, Charlie Potts said to the foreign visitor, is that live birds are his favorite kind of shotgun shooting. He competes in rifle and pistol, too. Came in second at Wimbledon in 38 or 9. The Wimbledon Cup was the annual prone rifle match held on the 1,000-yard range at Camp Perry, Ohio. Pull! The bird came out of the second trap from the far right. The pigeon was tumbling from the jet of compressed air, and when it started flying, it seemed to aim straight for the spot between Max's feet. Collins hit it with almost the entire shot column. The lead pellets arrested the bird's momentum entirely, and it fell like a stone a third of the way to the shooter. A rifle shooter? I never would have believed it had I not seen it myself. Max is hot today, all right. Charlie's comment proved to be the understatement of the week. The wind had abated slightly, but was still very strong when Joe Devers stepped into position. Every shooter at the match had by now become aware of Max Collins's phenomenal score of 24. It was universally accepted that Devers was the only shooter who had a chance of beating Max by going 25 straight without a miss. Pull! The bird was released from the trap second from the right, and Devers hit it about 7 feet off the ground. As the wind carried the dead pigeon slightly towards the left side of the arena, Joe Devers centered the corpse with the shot pattern from the second barrel. It dropped directly in front of him. Joe's the fastest man I know on multiple shots, about as fast as Herb was with a Model 12 before he had his heart attack, Max whispered to Henry. You should see him with a pump. I never could reliably get past 4 clays thrown in the air at the same time. Joe can hit 5 every time. He says I concentrate too much on the first shot. I need to get on to the next shot right away. That's why he's so fast on multiple targets. Henry nodded. He knew exactly what his uncle meant. His own rifle shooting efforts faced the same dilemma. If you spent too much time getting a shot right, the next target would be on the ground before you could squeeze the trigger. If you hurried all your shots, you missed everything. The trick was to stay right on the edge of acceptable control and gradually increase your speed. Devers killed the next 6 birds well inside the fence. Though he shot each pigeon twice, only one of them had still been alive when the second shot charge hit it. Max, Henry, and the rest of the crowd watched intently as the man continued to score clean hits. It finally happened on Devers' 11th bird. Pull! The far left trap opened and the jet of compressed air launched the bird into the air. The pigeon was aimed upwards and started flying up and with the wind. Joe Devers swung left and shot the bird cleanly about 10 feet off the ground. He pulled his Perazzi down out of recoil and fired the upper barrel. His second shot string hit the dead bird when it was 4 feet from the dirt. The impact gave it enough of a push that the bird landed 3 feet outside the fence. Reflexively, several hundred people sucked in a deep breath. They would spend the rest of the day debating whether or not the bird would have fallen inside the fence if Joe Devers hadn't fired the second shot. "Missed bird," the official scorer called out. "What happens if he only misses one like you did, Uncle Max?" Henry asked in a whisper. "Ties for high score split the first and second place prize money evenly in this shoot." He looked over to where Devers was staring at the missed bird. Henry nodded. No one left on the roster could catch up, even killing 25 straight. Henry and Max watched Joe Devers kill the next 3 birds well inside the fence, using a single shot on each one. Henry started to become anxious. "Pull!" The 15th bird was launched out of the extreme left trap. Just as Joe Devers swung on it, the pigeon regained its sense of orientation, pulled its wings in, and aimed its beak towards the ground to gain some momentum before starting to fly. The move caused Devers' shot string to go high. 2 pellets connected with the pigeon, one in its right wing and one creasing its back. The bird, wounded but not dead, spread its wings and glided with the wind. As Joe pulled his gun out of recoil, Yves Rayonne watched in fascination as the dying bird made a flared landing on the top wire of the short fence. Henry knew exactly what was going through the shooter's mind. If Devers shot the bird where it sat, it was a virtual certainty that it would fall away from them, on the outside of the fence. The only thing to do was wait and hope that the bird, when it took flight again, came back inside the perimeter. Joe and all the spectators held their collective breath. The pigeon was not up to flying, and it instinctively knew that the source of its troubles was upwind. It hopped off the fence wire and started walking west. "Miss Bird," the scorer called out. As noise erupted from the crowd, Joe Devers centered the wounded pigeon with a shot charged from his upper barrel. The crowd watched with considerably less interest as Joe killed the final 10 birds within the fence. He was now fighting to hold on to second place. Everywhere they walked at the range, Max drew stares and comments from the people who had heard of the money he had won in the Calcutta. Pigeon shooters clustered around Henry's uncle to congratulate him, express their admiration, and in a few cases conceal their envy. The purse was over $47,000, and Max Collins did not have to split his half of it with anyone. "You cost Hayden here over 5 G's today, Max," Denny Marks said with a laugh. The crowd had dwindled to several shooting friends of Max's, and a few others. "Like hell he did," Hayden Burke shot back. "When I seen how Collins here was hotter'n a monk's dream, I laid off my share of Devers for 60 cents on the dollar and put some side money on my new favorite. I got me enough scratch off in that little wager to convince one of them girls down to the diamond that I'm Gary Grant out slumming. That is, if I get me one isn't too smart." All of the men in the group laughed at Burke's joke. There might be a few cocktail waitresses in Nevada casinos who did not know who Gary Grant was, but every single one of them would recognize Hayden Burke. "But key risk, son. If I had lost the 5, it would have been worth every bit of it watching that run Collins here had. If he'd been on 'em any sooner, they'd have still been in the traps." "You got that right," one of the men added. "Max, would you and your nephew like to join us for dinner? Hayden, me, and a few others, we thought we'd head to Melton's about 8:30. Doyle Patterson was speaking. He was the owner of the Skeet and Trap Range. "If they serve rare steaks and good bourbon and maybe a decent hamburger for Henry here, we'd be glad to," Max answered. "I think they can take care of both of you, and since we give them our birds, maybe Henry would like to taste one of the ones you shot. They do a good job of barbecued pigeon." Henry nodded emphatically at the suggestion. "You going in the clubhouse now, Max?" Patterson asked. "Not just yet, Doyle. You got a free trap field up on the north side?" "Well, sure. Nobody's shooting up there right now." He grinned at the big man. "You mean you haven't had enough excitement for one day? I've been having all the fun today. Henry here doesn't shoot shotguns much, but he has a Model 70 he'd like to heat up, and there's nothing but desert north of here. Think the noise will bother anyone?" Max asked. "Centerfire rifles were a lot louder than shotguns. We shoot cannons around here sometimes, fella. Grab your gear, kid." Max Collins fished his car keys out of his pants pocket and threw them to the boy. Henry rushed off to where the car was parked. The other men in the group were trap and pigeon shooters and had no particular interest in watching a teenage boy shoot a bolt-action rifle. They were having a good time, however, and walking along with the winner of the Calcutta and reliving the excitement of the competition was a very pleasant thing for each one of them. That was the reason that when Henry and Max reached the North Trap Range, Hayden Burke, Doyle Patterson, and 4 other men were right behind them. "What you got there, 243 Winchester?" one of the men asked when Henry pulled the rifle out of its case. Henry figured that the man's guess was because his rifle had a thick barrel. The Model 70 of the vintage Henry owned had been made in a heavy barrel version and several of the smaller calibers for varmint hunters, and Henry assumed the man had made this inference because his 375 also had a thick barrel. He must think I shoot my groundhogs real close, and Henry thought. Or maybe where this guy comes from, everybody puts 1.5 power scopes on their varmint rifles. In point of fact, Neil Stedman had no idea that Winchester made varmint rifles in 243, and hadn't even noticed the barrel contour on Henry's gun. He had asked Henry if his rifle was a 243 Winchester because that was the smallest caliber that came to mind. He doubted the 15-year-old was using a 270 or 30-06, although he supposed it was possible. "No, a 375 Holland & Holland. Uncle Max has been letting me shoot it." "Shoot it? Hell, I gave it to you, kid. It's yours," Max said with a shake of his head. "Shoot it? Hell, I gave it to you, kid. It's yours," Max said with a shake of his head. Henry said nothing. It made him feel awkward when people gave him valuable presents. "What load you shooting today?" Max asked. 235 grain spear and a case full of 4,831. Stays under 2.5 inches at 200. Manuals say it's going about 2,850. He reached into an olive drab pouch originally designed to carry a gas mask, pulled out a cartridge, and handed it to Max for his inspection. "At least these people won't act like I'm crazy to shoot a 375 and start saying dumb things about my elephant gun," he thought, as he turned away and put in his earplugs. "Trap and pigeon shooters shoot more than I do. They probably all have. Fives," and walked up towards the 16-yard line. He did not see the looks on the faces of the 5 men who stood around his uncle, staring at the cartridge Max held. Henry carried his rifle in his right hand. Slung over his shoulder and hanging at his left side was the makeshift ammo pouch. It was divided into 2 partitions and held about 100 rounds of 375 H&H Magnum ammo. The young rifleman assumed that many of the competitors he'd seen that day had started shooting at an earlier age than he himself had. Henry was possessed of a logical, orderly mind, and he further assumed that any shooter good enough to compete in Reno's high-stakes live pigeon shoots would think it perfectly reasonable that a serious rifleman would want to sharpen his skills on moving targets. Henry was right in his first assumption and dead wrong on the second. "You need something to shoot at, Max. Want me to have one of the boys bring some cans from the clubhouse?" Doyle Patterson asked. The men watched as Henry picked up the aluminum control box that was at the end of the thick black cable and carried it with him. "Why, you out of clays?" Max replied. Henry had walked to the 16-yard line. In regulation trap shooting, this was the firing position closest to the concrete bunker that housed the electric thrower. He looped the control box through the strap of his ammo pouch so that it hung below waist level on his left side. Henry transferred the rifle to his left hand and awkwardly reached into the pouch with his right. He withdrew 4 loaded rounds. The Model 70 held 3 of the big cartridges in the magazine and a 4th one in the chamber. Henry loaded his rifle and threw it quickly to his shoulder a few times. He had mounted a Weaver KL-5 scope on his 375. Most users of the low-powered optic were shotgun shooters who attached them to their slug guns in deer season. Henry liked the wide field of view the small scope offered. He held the rifle in his right hand at waist level and touched the button on the control box with his left thumb. The clay pigeon sailed out of the trap house. Henry looked at its trajectory without making a move to raise his gun. He wanted to see how they were flying. He had sighted his rifle in at 25 yards. That was the first point where the bullet crossed the line of sight as viewed through the scope. Past that distance, the bullet would strike higher than the point of aim, until gravity pulled it back down and the slug once again crossed the line of sight at a little over 200 yards. I'm going to have to be awfully fast, or hold a little under them, the boy thought. I'm 16 yards away from the bird before they even get out of the thrower. The kid thinks he's going to shoot trap with an elephant rifle? Neil Stedman said in disbelief. The entire group suddenly realized what Henry intended to do. 10-1 against that shot, Hayden Burke muttered without considering the group he was with. Covered, Max Collins said in a loud voice as he pressed a bill into Burke's unsuspecting palm. As the others started to turn towards Max, Henry pressed the control button again and threw the rifle to his shoulder. The 6 men, none of whom were wearing hearing protection, snapped their heads towards the boy at the sound of the mechanical trap unleashing the clay pigeon. It flew straight away from Henry. A thunderous blast split the air, and the clay bird disintegrated into black dust. As Henry rode the recoil, he racked the bolt and chambered a second round. Jesus, I never... Before Doyle Patterson could finish the sentence, Henry had sent a second clay sailing northwards and reduced it to fragments with another shattering blast. The men remained silent, held their fingers in their ears, and stared at Henry Bowman as he broke the next 2 birds as well. As Henry was reloading his rifle, Hayden Burke suddenly remembered the bill that Max had pressed into his hand. He hadn't looked at it yet. The Texan lowered his eyes to his open palm, and they grew wide. Grover Cleveland. Max Collins had bet $1,000 on his nephew. Didn't you always say you wouldn't give 10-1 against the sun coming up in the morning, Hayden? Max had a wolfish grin on his face. The others stared at the 2 men, wondering what would happen. Before Burke could answer, another blast made the men flinch. Reflexively, all eyes went to the trap field. Another hit. Hayden Burke started laughing. It took less than 10 minutes for Henry to fire at 43 clays from the 16-yard line. Of the 43, Henry hit 36. On the 44th throw, no bird flew out of the concrete box. The trap needed to be refilled. In the meantime, a small crowd had gathered around the men back at the 25-yard line. Several had come to see what was making the loud noise, and word of Burke's loss spread quickly. While Doyle's refilling the trap, Hayden, Max Collins said pleasantly in a voice loud enough so that the men around him could all hear, how about deciding what kind of odds you'll give me on one set of doubles? Max had no idea if Henry could hit 2 clay birds with a bolt-action rifle, but he wasn't about to let the oil man know it. Burke was in a much better mood than most men would be who had just lost $10,000 in front of witnesses right after making an impulsive decision. You call it this time, Burke replied. The smile was just below the surface. Even money until he either hits or misses both, Max said after a moment's reflection. One broken, it's a pass. Burke considered this. No bet, he said finally. Henry walked back to the group carrying his Winchester at the balance point with the bolt retracted. He was completely unaware of the money that had been wagered on his shooting skills. Henry, Hayden here wants to know if you can shoot doubles with your 375, Max said with a straight face. Boy, I don't know about that, Mr. Burke, and I'm not sure I want to try it in front of 24 nationally ranked shooters. With a Garand, no problem, even a Mauser, yeah, at least sometimes. He looked at his Model 70. But this gun's got more recoil, and I'm afraid I'd be too slow in the second shot, be awfully far out. Not sure where to hold on that second bird either. I'll give it a try, though. Henry turned and walked back to the 16-yard line. I'll run the trap for you, Henry, Doyle Patterson offered when he returned from the concrete bunker that held the throwers. He had seen fit to put a pair of plugs in his ears. Mr. Burke wants me to try to shoot doubles, Henry explained with more than a little embarrassment. I don't know if I'll have much luck, but... He left the sentence unfinished. All set? Patterson asked. Henry nodded. Pull! Henry threw the gun to his shoulder and snapped off the shot when the crosshairs hit the first bird. As the rifle recoiled, Henry's left eye caught a fleeting glimpse of clay fragments in the air. He slapped his right hand up, back, forward, and down. He did not bother to grasp the bolt handle, but rather knocked it up and back with the base joint of his little finger, and then slammed it forward and shut with the hollow in the palm of his hand. The Winchester's bolt knob was round and smooth, and perfect for the rapid maneuver. Henry found the second bird in the scope and fired his second shot just as the black disc was about to hit the ground. It missed. Just over the top of it and late, I think, he said, staring out at the trap field. It took me too long to find the second one. Maybe now that I've seen them fly, I can get on a little faster, he added silently. The boy looked out at the trap field, trying to judge how far away the second bird had been when it hit the ground. 45 yards, looks like, 2¼ inches high. Max, Henry, and the rest of the crowd watched intently as the man continued to score clean hits. It finally happened on Deaver's 11th bird. Pull! This time Henry leaned farther into the first shot, and he worked the bolt a tiny bit faster than on his first try. As he pulled the big rifle out of recoil, he swung it slightly to the right, knowing where the second bird would be. As the rifle scope's crosshairs fell through the trajectory of the clay bird, Henry pulled the trigger, hoping that his estimates of the range and the space below the bird were both right. They were close enough. The half-ounce lead and copper projectile, which was traveling at over twice the speed of sound, caught the second bird an inch from the edge. It shattered nicely. "Got it," Patterson yelled. "Damn, but that's strong." "Mr. Patterson," Henry said quickly, "I'm not sure I could do that again if we stayed here all night. In front of the crowd we got now, can I quit on that one? Quit shooting doubles, I mean?" "Sure thing, Henry. I got an idea. Something else I want you to try. Come on, walk back with me and let's see if your uncle has taken any more of old Hayden's money." Henry opened his rifle, stooped over to pick up his fired brass, and hurried to catch up with the older man. He thought nothing of Patterson's last comment. "I may be slow, but I do learn," Hayden Burke said softly to Max as Henry and Doyle approached them. "Falling off a cliff's one thing, but I wasn't about to climb back up and jump off it afterwards." "Max, your nephew here reminded me of something I heard years ago," the owner of the trap range said after the men in the group had exclaimed about Henry's shooting. "You ever hear the story about how when John Browning wanted the U.S. government to adopt his bar, he got Ad Topperwine to shoot skeet with one in front of the guys who decided what guns got bought?" Patterson had the details wrong, but the basic story was right. "Seems I heard Top mention something about that once when I was over at Olin's East Alton range in hell, must have been the mid-40s. "A bar fires from an open bolt," Henry exclaimed immediately. His mind was already working out how to compensate for the heavy bolt lurching forward before the gun actually fired. "Think you could do it?" Doyle asked, smiling. "I don't know," Henry said finally. "Want to try?" "You've got a bar?" Henry almost yelled. "Something even better." Doyle turned to Max. "Melton's will take us whenever we get there. You aren't starving or anything, are you?" "We got lots of time. Then I'll be right back." Doyle Patterson set off for the clubhouse at a brisk walk. In the next few minutes, Max was congratulated by more shooters, and his nephew was peppered with questions about shooting clays with a high-power rifle. Henry Bowman remained unaware of his uncle's wager on his shooting. "Here we go, Henry. Pull her on out of there." Doyle had returned with a gun case and a GI 50 caliber ammo can. He slid the zipper down on the side of the vinyl gun case, and Henry withdrew the weapon. The receiver's famous silhouette was instantly obvious, but a pistol grip protruded from below, and the slender barrel had a large slotted device on the muzzle end. "A Colt monitor!" Henry exclaimed. The monitor was the police version of the bar that Colt had introduced several years after World War I had ended, in an effort to make use of a few of the countless surplus parts the factory had left over from unfinished wartime weaponry. The gun had no bipod, was several pounds lighter than the military bar, and had a separate pistol grip for a more comfortable hold. It also had a cuts compensator attached to the muzzle. The cuts reduced recoil and completely eliminated the weapon's tendency to climb under full auto fire. "Ever seen one before?" Doyle asked, impressed at the young man's knowledge. "Just pictures." Henry retracted the bolt and threw the 16-pound automatic rifle to his shoulder. It balanced well and wasn't as awkward as he had expected. He pulled the trigger and the bolt slammed home. "It's definitely going to be different shooting aerial targets with this one," Henry said immediately. Doyle opened the ammo can, revealing 15 magazines neatly arranged on end in 3 rows of 5. He handed one to the boy. Henry retracted the bolt again and took the proffered magazine in his free hand. He did not insert it into the weapon, for to do so would render the gun hot and ready to fire full automatic. Henry walked back to his spot on the 16-yard line and slid the magazine into his right hip pocket behind his wallet. He upended the monitor and poked his thumbnail in the ejection port to reflect some of the fading sunlight into the barrel from the back. He looked down the muzzle to make sure there were no obstructions. The bore was clear. Henry pulled the magazine from his pocket and examined the top cartridge. The tip of the bullet was painted black, and the head stamp said LC-44. 1944 Lake City Armor Piercing, 30-06. Probably gets it from Charlie. Henry snapped the magazine into the weapon, and once again threw it to his shoulder. 1,944 Lake City armor piercing. Probably gets it from Charlie. Henry snapped the magazine into the weapon and once again threw it to his shoulder. He drew a bead on a yellow and black fragment of broken clay bird lying on the ground 30 yards out. When Henry squeezed the trigger, the Colt emitted 2 thundering blasts. Got to get off the trigger a little faster, Henry silently admonished himself. The gun's report sounded louder than Henry's. 375. This startled some of the spectators, but not the shooter. The cut's compensator was designed to redirect muzzle gases to reduce a gun's recoil. In so doing, the device increased the noise level for anyone behind the weapon. After the 375, the monitor's recoil felt mild. The first bullet struck the ground in front and slightly to the right of the clay fragment that had been Henry's aiming point. Bolt inertia makes it hit low and a bit right when you shoot it from the shoulder this close up. He fired a second time at the same spot to make sure, this time releasing the trigger as soon as he felt it break. Henry then slid the rear sight to the 300-yard setting and tried again. Dirt flew just to the right of the piece of compressed clay. He touched off another single round while holding on the left edge of the target. The broken target vanished in a black cloud of dust and flying dirt. He moved the rear sight up one more notch and tried again on another fragment, this time holding slightly under it and even with the left edge. The results were the same. Let's give it a try, Henry said over his shoulder to Doyle Patterson. Pull! Henry Bowman threw the monitor to his shoulder and loosed a round at the departing clay. It continued its journey. Got to get my swing started sooner, Henry thought. This thing weighs almost twice as much as my 375. He swallowed and stood at the ready. Max, Henry, and the rest of the crowd watched intently as the man continued to score clean hits. It finally happened on Deaver's 11th bird. Pull! The gun was coming up to Henry's shoulder at the same time as the word came out of his mouth. Another miss. Maybe I need to hold a little more left. They're further out than those shots I took for practice. Max, Henry, and the rest of the crowd watched intently as the man continued to score clean hits. It finally happened on Deaver's 11th bird. Pull! The bird disintegrated. Son of a bitch, Hayden Burke said softly but with feeling. Amen to Neil Stedman started to say, but his comment was drowned out by the muzzle blast of the Colt monitor as Henry powdered another bird. When Henry called for the next bird, Doyle Patterson hit the doubles button on the trap control. Henry broke both birds. It would appear that the kid's got his swing down, Max said dryly. Son of a bitch, Hayden Burke repeated. This thing shoots great, Mr. Patterson, Henry said happily. Real smooth once you get used to the open bolt. Okay if I keep going? Have at it, Henry. You want singles or doubles? Let's see, I've got 8 shots left in the mag. Count off 1001, 1002, and let me V8 birds spaced a second apart at my signal. You got it. 2 to 1 he breaks at least half, Charlie Potts said to the men watching. No one took him up on his offer. Pull! At Henry's call, Doyle Patterson started pressing the button at 1-second intervals. The powerful machine rifle boomed out a cadence as Henry swung on each of the clays flying out of the trap. On the 8th shot, he turned the rifle on its left side and looked in the ejection port. The magazine was empty. He had broken 5 of the 8 clays. I think I'm getting the hang of it, Henry said to Doyle. Okay if I shoot it some more? I can pay you for the ammo and I'll clean your gun. I know this wartime Lake City stuff has chlorate primers. Henry, you can finish out the can if you want. There were 14 more magazines loaded, each holding 20 cartridges. You don't think they're all ready to go eat? Hey, all of you, Doyle yelled. Henry here's going to shoot some more trap at the bar. Anyone wants to eat right away, better head on over to Melton's now. We'll catch up after we're out of 06. None of the men assembled at the trap range turned to leave. Conversation at dinner revolved around the shooting that both Max and Henry had done that day. I cannot imagine swinging a gun of 7 kilos for 200 birds, the man next to Henry said. It was the shooter from Barcelona. It was getting heavy towards the end, Henry admitted as he took another bite of barbecued pigeon. I was missing a lot by then. Henry's average, which was running over 80% by the third batch of 20, had dropped to about 50% by the time he had fired 10 magazines at the clays. Hitting a lot too, Doyle Patterson observed. You like that Colt monitor, huh? The man asked pointedly. I sure do. The last 80 rounds Henry had fired on full auto from the hip at individual clay fragments on the ground. He had hit most of them, and his hip shooting skills had further impressed the audience. "You paid the $200 NFA registration tax on it?" Henry asked of their host. Doyle laughed. "Hell no, bought that one as a deactivated gun. I keep the guts out of it when I'm not shooting it, so it's legal except when I'm out pulling the trigger. No federal boys around this area, and if any of them ever do show up while I'm out having fun, I'll pay the $2 and register the damn thing, if I have to." Doyle saw Henry's worried look and went on. "Cops don't care, son. Hell, every cop around here has at least one machine gun in his closet, and most have a lot more than that. No one pays any attention to that crazy federal law, unless someone makes a stink about it. Then you pay the tax if you want to keep the gun shootable." His smile turned into a frown. "This thing they got coming up now, though." His voice trailed off. "That pig from Texas is going to fuck us OD before he slinks off to his ranch." "You got that right," Hayden Burke threw in immediately. "I'd be afraid to show my face back in Texas was I him." "You want that monitor of mine, Henry?" Doyle said suddenly. "What? No, You ought to have it. I never shoot the damn thing, and from this evening I'd say John Browning designed it just for you. Max, can Henry have that monitor he was shooting tonight?" "Sure, if you're getting rid of it. What do you want for it?" "You said you were buying dinner, and I got a bunch of other machine guns. We'll call it even." He turned to Henry. "Just make sure you strip it when you got it in your car. Cops here in Nevada don't give a shit, but they might farther east." "Speaking of paying for things," Hayden Burke said as he laid down his steak knife and reached into his pocket, "I'd best give you this afore I forget." He turned to Max Collins and held out a roll of bills wrapped with a rubber band. "Give it to Henry. It's his." Burke swung his arm over towards the boy without hesitation. Henry looked puzzled. He made no move to take the money. "What's this for?" he asked his uncle. "Made a little wager with Hayden here on your behalf. Looks like we both made some pocket money today." Max was grinning broadly. Henry looked bewildered as he tentatively took the roll of cash. "There's $10,000 here," Henry exclaimed in a shocked whisper after he had counted the 10 large bills. "What did you bet on?" he demanded of his uncle. For a moment he had forgotten about the monitor and that there were other people at the table. "Hayden gave me 10-1 you couldn't hit a clay pigeon with your 375 from the 16-yard line, so I laid $1,000 on you." Max was having a good time with this. Henry swung towards Hayden Burke. "You came to a live pigeon shoot and gave 10-1 odds I couldn't hit one clay bird?" he demanded, with a look of utter disbelief on his face. Max Collins was really enjoying himself now. The men around the table, who had expected Henry to be surprised that his uncle had wagered $1,000 on one shot, immediately saw the logic of Henry's incredulous reaction. The men erupted into laughter. For the first time since he could remember, Hayden Burke was embarrassed. "Henry assumes everyone here could do just as well with a rifle," Max explained in between gasps for breath. "Well, they all could if they'd practice it a little," Henry said defensively. He still could scarcely believe what had happened. "There you have it, Hayden," Max said with a look of pure delight on his face. "Anyone can do it." "Hell yes," Charlie Potts threw in. "I've been thinking about getting rid of my engraved Browning trap gun and replacing it with a Springfield," he said, naming the surplus World War I bolt-action rifle that could be had for $20. "Rifle bullet won't glance off the clay way some that puny old birdshot will do." I think I'll go with a 30-30 lever action," Neil Stedman added, warming to the game. "Lots lighter in my 12 gauge, and holds more shots too." "Henry here may be a strong young fella, but I'm getting on in years," Doyle Patterson said. 16-pound monitor doesn't swing so easy like it used to. I'm going to get an AR-15 for my wing shooting. They only weigh 6.5 pounds. Glad I convinced Henry to take that old boat anchor off my hands." He turned and looked at his guests. "Now, Gravestock here," he said, giving a nod to a man from Wichita Falls. "He's from Texas. Down there they got almost as much good taste as a band of drunk Mexicans. I figure Larry, now, he ought to switch from his Parazzi to a Weatherby. Since he came in 5th today, I think he needs a bigger gun. If A375 is right for someone in high school, Larry, I think you should. Shoot A460. The 460 Weatherby was the largest American-made rifle on the market. "Yeah," Britt Robinson said immediately. "A460 with one of them square stocks with the slanty foreign tip and all the white line spacers and checkering that looks like a bunch of leaves and acorns." That'd be perfect for Gravestock. Maybe even a gold inlay on the receiver, of a one-eyed horse sitting in an outhouse taking a crap. Something tasteful and all. Britt was a friend and neighbor of Gravestock's. They both hated the styling of Weatherby rifles. Soon everyone at the table was engulfed in laughter at the idea of selling their trap and pigeon shotguns and competing instead with hunting rifles and machine guns. Henry had been embarrassed at first, but the men made him feel like he was one of them. The man from Barcelona grinned like a fool. He thought the Americans were crazy. It was one of the reasons he loved visiting the United States. Got anything in mind for your winnings, Henry? Neil Stedman asked finally. 10 G's ought to go a fair ways, lest you got a girlfriend or plan to go to the Mustang Ranch, Joe Devers offered. That's God's truth, said Doyle Patterson. Just ask your Uncle Max. This comment broke up everyone at the table. Well, Henry said in answer to Neil's question, I guess I'll use some of it to buy a few more cases of ammo and probably another loading tool and some more components. I don't shoot as much as the professional trap shooters here, but it seems like I'm always just about out of ammo. His mind was on something else that he wanted also, something he'd wanted for 9 years. You ought to check out the gun show tomorrow morning, Doyle broke in. Always some good things at the Reno show, particularly for a man who likes fine rifles. Do you think there might be a 4-bore for sale there? Henry asked immediately. Hey, that's right, Max Collins said. You've been trying to find one of those. He shrugged. Hey, have a look. You might run across one there. What's this now? Neil Stedman asked. A big English double-barreled rifle throws about a 1-inch diameter bullet, Henry explained. They made them 70 or 80 years ago, and they weigh about 25 pounds. Henry's been trying to find one for sale ever since he was 6 years old, Max added. We got a picture of one that a guy had in England, and that's as close as he's come. Christ, doesn't the kick on those big rifles make hamburger out of your shoulder, Henry? It was Charlie Potts speaking. You were out there with that 375 Magnum in just a t-shirt. Feel his shoulder, Charlie, Max suggested. Potts reached across the table and squeezed the boy's shoulder. What the hell's under there? It's a callus, Mr. Potts, Henry answered. The doctor trims it when it gets too thick. By now, everyone at the table was staring at Henry Bowman. Show Charlie your hands, Henry, Max said. Henry turned his hands palms up. The areas between thumb and forefinger of each hand had a thick callus. They were mirror images of one another. The end joint of each of Henry's index fingers were also calloused. About 1,000 rounds of .44 Magnum a week on average, Henry explained. Left hand, too, I see. Double action from the hip only with my left. Trying to do aimed fire with my left eye was messing up my speed shooting, so I gave that up. You really like those big boomers, huh? Neil asked. That's nothing, Neil, Max threw out. Henry's dad got him a damn Nazi anti-tank cannon for his birthday last year. Your father shoots too, then? Doyle asked. Henry smiled sadly. Dad died of cancer at the end of April. He didn't shoot much, but he liked to watch me. What he loved best was flying. He could make an airplane do things you wouldn't believe unless you saw it. Dad said as long as he was buying avgas for himself, he ought to keep me in ammo. Henry smiled again, this time with genuine happiness. Dad gave me 20 cases of ammo for my Solitherm cannon on the last day we went flying together. Then you ought to go out in the desert tomorrow with the Balls group, Doyle Patterson said. They're having one of their shoots. In fact, if Max has other plans, I'll drive you out in the Jeep. Wouldn't mind seeing their show myself. Balls is having a shoot here? Henry said excitedly. Can I go, Uncle Max? What the hell is Balls? Max Collins demanded. He knew he was risking being set up as the straight man if this was a joke. The Benevolent Artillery Loaders and Loafers Society, Henry replied immediately. They're mostly from California and they shoot cannons. Not just little 20mm ones like my Solitherm, but big ones they haul around on trailers. Dangerous Dave is one of them, Dave Cumberland. I get primers for my 20mm brass from him. Well, sure, Max said to his nephew. I think I might enjoy seeing some cannon shooting myself. Okay if I tag along too, or is this some private deal? Neil Stedman asked their host. No problem. Then count me in too, Charlie Potts added. Same here. I'll join you as well, if I may. Don't leave me out of this deal, Doyle. Well, shoot, we'll all go then. 2 cars should do it, Patterson decided. We better make it 3 cars in case those Balls folks let Henry shoot their cannons, Britt Robinson said quickly. Why's that? We need to bring plenty of clay pigeons.